All right, good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Planetary Pause series. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis, and today we welcome Rickey Gard Diamond as our guest for an energizing program on money and values and what we value. So I'm very excited to welcome her. She is a columnist for Ms. Magazine and is the author of a wonderful book called Screwnomics: How Our Economy Works Against Women and Real Ways to Make Lasting Change. I put in the chat box a link to our local bookstore, Reader's Books, where you can order that. And if you don't live locally, you can order it from your local bookstore. So this is also the title of her talk today. Rickey learned about economics as a single mother on welfare while she was attending university. And upon completing her studies, she taught writing and literature at Vermont College for more than 20 years. She has published short stories, nonfiction, and a novel, Second Sight, as well as edited a newspaper on poverty issues, and she became the founding editor of a magazine, Vermont Woman. She won a National Newspaper Award for her in-depth research and atypical sources, which are mostly women, for a series on literature, language, and economics. She is also the founder of An Economy of Our Own, an organization that has the purpose of uniting women across divisions of race, sexuality, gender, religion, and nationality to help disarm an unjust economy waged as war by a tiny minority of privileged men. I don't think anyone better understands the economic challenges for women and even the 99% and how they can be overcome. So welcome, Rickey.
Well, it's so great to be here. I'm a big admirer of Georgia Kelly as well.
Well, thank you.
and Praxis and your work.
Well, thank you. It's mutual, as we know. And I am on your advisory board of an economic of our own, and I'm very excited to be part of that and to be part of this group. So I'm going to start with some questions. And first, I'd like you to tell people what led you to become what you call an amateur economist. And I want to describe, first of all, what amateur really means, which is a love of a topic or a study. And I think we should reclaim that word, because a lot of times the people who love the study end up knowing more in a broader sense than the specialists. So we need the amateurs as well as the so-called professionals. So I want to reclaim that word in a positive way and ask you what happened in your life that promoted you to study economics the way you have.
Well, I took Latin in high school. I don't know if that's taught anymore in high school, but took 3 years of Latin, and so I was familiar with the Latin roots of many of our words. And love is exactly the element that seems to be missing from our current economy, which is, as you say, currently waged as war. So my husband worried about it, claiming that word would somehow diminish me, but I agree with you that I think my being outside the realm of, I'm not an economist. I don't even play one on TV, I often say, because I think being on the outside and being a part of the economy and experiencing it differently without a lot of theoretical baggage enabled me to look at it freshly from my own point of view, from a woman's point of view, a woman who found herself living in poverty when I was not only attending university, but I was working full time. I had children, 3 children. I had $25 a week in child support. And so it seemed to me, if I were working full time, that I ought to be able to support my family. And when I wasn't able to, I assumed there was something wrong with me. And that's when I ended up going to the welfare office in Michigan, where I grew up, and where my mother had a license plate, if you remember this story, that was very popular in Michigan then, because there were a lot of racial tensions. It was called, the state motto was Michigan Water Wonderland, and she had a license plate that said Michigan Welfare Wonderland. And I never worked up the courage to ask her if she knew how that felt for me to see when she pulled up into my driveway. But she was there to help me take care of the kids when I was going to classes. And so I didn't bring up a sore subject. But from reading Screwnomics that a lot of the story has to do with my mother and me. We had very different generations, obviously, and different life experiences. And so came at the economy with very different points of view. And sometimes, we're butting heads together. But I think that was also a plus for me to try to look at it from her point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a challenge. And then I'd like you to talk about the history of women and credit, women and loans, property ownership. I think a lot of us missed the generation where this actually changed, or missed it by a few years. But I think it's very interesting for people to know how recent it was that women were able to get credit on their own, or loans, or even own property. So could you flesh that out a little bit for us?
Well, I gave a couple of presentations at the National Organization for Women and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And one of the slides that I showed underlined something that Gerda Lerner said about women, that our sexual reproduction capacities were the first property. And her book, The Creation of Patriarchy, is built on that foundation. When you look at common law, which was the law that was a part of the founding of our nation, married women didn't own property. Whatever she had became her husband's, and if he died, the inheritance would go to the nearest male relative, and that might be her son, or it might be her brother or her uncle. She might have as much as a third on which to live, but they didn't want her to get too carried away with that. So the first law that Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of our important foremothers, established was property laws concerning married women, and those laws began to be changed in 1858, but it took until 1974 for the Women's Equal Economic Opportunity Act to pass, so that a woman could open her own bank account without a male co-signer, either her father or her husband or her brother. Before that, she had to have a male co-signer.
Now that's interesting, because as I recall, I opened a checking account. I don't know if this is different, without anyone vouching for me when it was in the late 60s. It's not, and I wondered if California law was different, or if you know that.
It's possible. I mean, women were out in the streets marching by then, and there were banks that were more enlightened than others, but the law came down in 1974 that said, no, you cannot discriminate against women.
See.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a matter of discriminating. Yeah, I think some banks obviously didn't discriminate that way. However, getting credit cards was a whole other matter, and getting loans was also problematic.
It's still a problem for women entrepreneurs to get loans. Yes.
Yeah, it still is. Some things don't change.
They will. I believe they will.
Oh yeah, they're on the process, certainly, of changing. One of the things I want to jump around a little bit, but I noticed that in your book you talk about the Jak Bank, J-A-K, that's spelled, in Switzerland. And I don't remember what year they were founded, but I'd like you to explain how they work, because it's really quite enlightened.
Yes, it's not Switzerland, it's Sweden.
Oh.
And the acronym that I pronounced Jack, and you corrected me, I guess it's Yak, but the JAK stands for land, labor, and capital. And it was started in 1965. And the remarkable thing about it is that it is a bank that does not use interest, does not loan money or earning interest. And well, how do they do that? Well, they do that by, they're defined as a nonprofit, but also defined as a bank by Sweden now, because by 2008, they had 35,000 members. And they had, let me look at my notes here. I wanted to make a note of this, $97 million in deposits and $86 million in loans. And the way they operate is if you get a mortgage through this bank, you would become a part of a community and be expected to be in relationship with your local bank, and they have potlucks and you get to know people. And the whole point of the bank is not that just you benefit, but that everyone who's a member of the bank benefits. And so you get to know one another and you get to helping one another. And it isn't just capital, but it's also work or sharing land or, you know, other resources. So it's kind of remarkable that instead of, if you paid your mortgage off, you would at the end of the payment own your house. So let's say it was $100,000. All right, $200,000 these days. And you would also have $200,000 in savings points. So normally the bank would be the people who had $200,000 of your money, because compound interest doubles your debt. And so most of us are paying, you know, twice as much for our houses when we get them through banks. But this allows you to have these savings points, which you can then spend by sharing it with your children, helping them build a house, helping a friend start a business, loaning it if you'd like to do that, but you can't earn interest on it, and you can't invest in Wall Street with this with these savings points. But in the system itself, which you can see is pretty big by now, you can do a lot with those dollars, because banks create dollars, which most people don't really understand.
Yeah, Ellen Brown has given a couple of programs for us, and she has talked a lot about that too.
Yeah.
About banks really just create money out of thin air when they create loans.
Yeah.
So it's a hard to believe process, and yet it is the way it is. And it takes time, I think, to grok it in our minds.
I know.
It's just so bizarre that why can't we create money out of thin air, you know? But anyway, this kind of goes into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which you printed in your book, the graphic of Hazel Henderson's cake, which she also was one of our speakers. And
Yeah.
I want you to talk about this, because there are 3 layers on the cake, and then there's icing on top. The icing on top, like, is the 1% with all the money. But I'd like you to explain what that cake looks like and what's valued in that cake monetarily.
Right. It's the first economic diagram I saw that really made sense to me. I thought, yes, that's exactly what I understand too. The bottom layer, the essential layer, you might say, the foundational layer, is nature, all of the work that Mother Nature does. And on top of that is another big fat layer called the love economy, which is that economy where, you know, families have relationships, and mothers take care of children, and fathers provide for their families by, you know, loving them and reading them stories, not necessarily out earning a living. And then there's a little thin layer in there, which is the crime filling, let's call it. It's kind of like a thin little cherry layer there. And on top of that is the nonprofit layer, yes. Mm-hmm. And on top of that one is the frosting that you were talking about, where the money is really being made, and where it's the sweetest, right? But none of that frosting would be held up without that nonprofit world that kind of picks up the pieces and from the crime layer that's going on, and then the nature and love economy, which are non-monetized. No money is exchanged, but is really making everything else possible.
Right. That's so interesting, that what we should be valuing much more is what holds up everything else in society. And
That's
yet it
right.
doesn't have any kind of monetary value, and often not any value because of it. It's just taken for granted. So I think, not our audience, but I think in our society generally, there's this expectation that, oh, well, that's a given. No, we don't pay for that.
That's a given. It's
That's
free for,
women's work.
yes, that's right. It's women's work, exactly.
Right. We don't pay
And
for that.
yeah, which is why we're, having a conversation about infrastructure. Well, what is infrastructure exactly? Is it just roads and bridges? Or are there these social interconnections that are really necessary for us to function as a society?
Yeah, we've certainly seen in Europe, they have, their infrastructure includes wonderful social programs that we don't have. And thanks to Bernie, it's really being pushed in our country finally. He's your senator, I know.
Yeah,
So you're lucky to have a senator like him.
we are lucky.
Yes, you are. So the other thing you talk about in your book, and I want you to expand a little bit about, is what you call pink money.
Oh, yes. Another
Yes,
complementary currency.
right.
I talked about, how we all can create our own currency. We could do it in our homes, or businesses do it in our communities. They give you loyalty dividends that you can then spend at their store, or all of that is currency creation. And I began to think that it was really the Berkshires that inspired me to think about this. They've been very creative about putting out a local currency, issuing it through their banks. You buy, say, $100 worth of this currency, and it gives you $110 or $120 of spending value in the local community. Of course, you can't pay your taxes with it, but you can spend it in your community, and so that's its value. And they, our Federal Reserve notes have, presidents, and all right, we've got that one. What was it, a $2 bill or?
I've seen one of those for a while. I used to collect them.
I know, whenever they put a woman on a money token, it seems to just go, down the drain right away. But anyway, so we put these presidents on the currency from the Federal Reserve, and what if we put somebody else on the, I suggested Harriet Tubman. This was before Harriet was actually put on a bill, but also Jonas Salk, who gave us the polio vaccine when the whole country was terrified by that pandemic. And he literally gave that patent away, and said, well, why wouldn't I? Well, why don't we celebrate that kind of caring, that kind of generosity of spirit? Walt Whitman would be a great person to put on a currency, and that currency would be a caring commons currency. And I proposed, and I'm only half joking, that we require, along with our tax returns, an inventory of our caring contributions to the nation, which, we could set the bar really low. It could be, you sent your mother a Mother's Day card, and okay, check the box, and ideally you'd have more than that to report. And then in return for that, you'd get what I'm calling the caring commons currency from the IRS, which would help remove the stigma of paying taxes. You might even feel proud of paying your taxes and demonstrating your caring and investment in the nation, and have this currency to spend freely. And in fact, unlike the currency that we have, you wouldn't be able to pay your taxes with this either, unless the government changed its mind. But the idea would be to get rid of it so that at the end of the year, if you still had carrying currency in your bank account, it would be costing you a fee. I forget what the name of it.
Demurrage.
Thank you. And you'd have to pay for holding on to that money, because the whole point is you really can't care too much, can you? I mean, who knows? We could have these gorgeous libraries and beautiful childcare centers and generous hospitals, and who knows what we could do if we just thought about money not only as debt and loans that we owe to the billionaires of the world, but as something we create out of our faith and trust in one another and our caring capacities.
Yes, this is something Bernard Lietaer, who you also have read and know, spoke about what he called yin and yang currencies. And the yang was the national currency that we did pay taxes in. And the yin was the local currency that was exactly like you described, that we could use in the local community. I think it would be perfectly compatible with public banks as well.
Yeah.
So these ideas really dovetail. But anyway, I think it's time we really start looking at local currencies much more seriously, I think, these days.
I agree.
So one thing you also brought up, which is, it's a little humorous in a way, but it gives an idea of creative thinking of how boycotts could be created to initiate different types of value in our system, or to get things changed. And one of the things you mentioned was, what would happen if women decided, okay, none of us are going to have babies this year? What would that do to the economy? I thought that was a really interesting mental exercise. What would happen to businesses if no women in the United States had babies in 2022, let's say? What would that do to businesses, and how might that be a pressure point? And if you have any comments on that, I'd be curious.
Well, I'd love to see it happen. I know it wouldn't be, it would take some planning ahead of time and a lot of persuading, and it wouldn't be 100%, but I thought it would put a dent in the demographics enough that, oh, maybe people would pay attention and listen to what women are saying about being tired of war being so profitable and life being so expensive. So it's a tool that we might have in our toolbox. Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. I mean, all of a sudden the sales would plummet for Huggies.
Exactly. Babies are a cash cow, aren't they? I mean,
right. They are a cash cow for certain businesses and companies.
And think of the armed services. They'd look forward to where they're going to get their soldiers if mothers stop having babies. It's kind of an extension of that old ancient idea of Lysistrata, where the play where women decided not to have sex anymore until men got over this warring business. But let's hit them where they're hurt. I know that one of the reasons that Europe is so much better at providing family supports is that they saw that dent in their demographics. Women were having fewer children, and they were worried about it. And so, and of course now they're dealing with it with immigration, but still, yeah. Graphics do matter, and our reproductive powers are powerful, or we wouldn't be looking at vigilantes in Texas trying to control us, right? Exactly. I mean, literally, unless you know that women's reproductive powers were the first property, it all seems kind of mysterious, but it makes perfect sense that as long as you can control and make sure that you create lots of really desperately poor babies too, who have to accept whatever jobs they can find. It's a very powerful thing that women have, that I don't think they think of it in that way.
Yes. Well, you've pointed to two people who, well, one we haven't had as a speaker because she's no longer with us, Gerda Lerner, who wrote the Creation of Patriarchy, which I think is a seminal book. Everyone should read that book. And then, of course, Riane Eisler, we have had on our program, and she wrote The Real Wealth of Nations, which is very relevant to what we've been talking about. And the nurturing, I can't remember exactly the name of her book that just came out, something about the nurturing
humanity. Nurturing
Yes,
our humanity. Yeah.
Nurturing Our Humanity, which is the one we interviewed her on. Yeah, excellent book. So
Uh-huh.
now, before we finish with my part of the interview, I'd like to have you talk about an economy of our own. What's that about, and what is it planning to do?
Well, when you mentioned the award that I got for my investigative reporting and my unusual sources, and there being women, and I met so many wonderful women, so many remarkable women when I was doing the research for Screwnomics, that I thought, oh, these women should be really famous. Why aren't they all household words? And I wanted to make sure that women's voices would be heard as women's voices in this economic realm that still continues to be male dominated. The bigger the pile of money, the fewer women you're going to find, right? And so I began to I talked with Rianne, who was kind enough to blurb my book, and I talked with you, Georgia, and I talked with Gwendolyn Hall Smith, who's written some great books, and Dee Dee Pershaw, all these great women that I kept discovering as I was doing my work with Ms. too, just constantly discovering new women. It's one of the pleasures of my life. And how could we join our voices together and be that much more difficult to ignore, because too often we want to think about the economy as about markets and the exchange of money, and nothing else counts. Well, that simply isn't true. And Hazel Henderson's cake is an illustration of that. And so many women talk about these issues, the importance of relationships. It's at the foundation of trusting relationships are necessary for any functioning economy. And we're having trouble right now because that trust is so eroded, and corruption does that.
Mm-hmm. It
Yeah.
certainly does.
So an economy of our own began to model intelligent women getting together and talking about stuff we don't usually talk about when we get together. And so we've sponsored, I think, 6 conversations by now. We have one planned for November 22nd, the week of Monday before Thanksgiving, focused on ancient economic wisdom, which includes indigenous wisdom, and we've got some women I had not heard of, and some mutual credit associations, women, again, just trying to create communities of trust involving money and involving the well-being of everyone in the group. And I'm thinking of a group called Ujima in Boston, headed by a woman named Nia Evans. There's a professor from University of Toronto, although she's an American. Her name is, I'm going to have to look it up, Caroline Hossein. And she just made a wonderful short film called The Banker Ladies, about African immigrants coming to Canada and creating what they called in Africa sushus, which are these mutual credit associations. Because in the mainstream economic world, financial world, they're often mistreated, overlooked, and denied.
Indeed. So
Yeah.
I wanted to remind everybody about your book, Screwnomics, how I think relevant it is. It's entertaining as well as really, I think, important information is in the book, and it's put together in a way that's very readable, very interesting. And it also has cartoons, and it has, at the end of each chapter, kind of a review, and also things that you can ask yourself or your community. So it's a very good book, and it also has a workbook that you can get too. So I wanted to just mention both of those things before we go into taking questions from the audience or comments, and I'll be putting more things in the chat box as we do this too.
I just put an economy of our own, and how people can see what we're doing there. And you can see the advisory board that we have put together, where Georgia serves.
Great. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you put that up there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of other things in there. I'm going to save the chat too. And I think most people know how to save it. If you don't, let me know because we will have it. Now I want to go to questions, comments from any of you. Do we have anything coming from our people? If not, we'll just continue chatting, but sometimes it takes a while to warm up.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe we will continue with some of the other things we were talking about already. And if you're interested, if you want to ask anything or make a comment, then just put your hand up automatically. I often don't see it when you put your hand up like this, but you can do it also. So I know that there are other things in the book that I think might be interesting to talk about. And I know one of the, yeah, you had something you want to say?
I just want to mention, I noticed that there are some gentlemen who have joined us, and
Right.
and you know, I emphasize how important the men who love us are, and how, you know, I know that I have a man like that in my life, and many of us have fathers or brothers who are supportive of us. But I think men are reluctant to think about the culture that we're talking about, this culture that wages war economically, because it's normal. It's just what has been for about 5,000 years. And so it's harder for them to question it, I think. So it's not as if men benefit from this system either. They don't. We're all pretty well traumatized by this system. I'm appreciative of all the men who are, you know, working at jobs that they don't find delightful either. But we're all kind of trapped into thinking this is the only way there is. But listening to women can give you some new ideas, and I hope it's helpful to men as well.
Yes, well, I'm sure it is, because a lot of what you say is relevant for the 99%.
Yes.
It's not just to women, it's relevant to all of us who are not part of that icing on the cake.
Right, exactly.
We're all in a different feel. It's like we have different levels of non-value, let's put it that way, or lesser value. So I think that's it's a good point to bring up. I put some books in the chat box because I think there are a lot, we've referenced a lot of books today in this conversation. And I think a lot of the information that you have put together has come from these thinkers and writers.
Oh, definitely. I think of myself as a translator of, you know, economic tomes that not everyone wants to read. And I try to make it more accessible to, and that came from I worked in the war on poverty, although the war was the last thing we needed, right? But we wage war on everything, on cancer, on terror, on, you know, but that just helped me to practice looking at government regulations or new rules or legislation and translating it in common language so that people can understand it. I consider that part of my job.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, because I remember, you know, maybe 10, 12 years ago, a lot of these ideas that we're talking about today were just not in discussions pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think we've been sharing a lot of knowledge in the past decade that has been very helpful for us to learn about how the economy works on certain levels. I mean, the compound interest thing, I'm never going to get it. It's just, I mean, I understand it basically, but not in any intricate degree. But it's such a sham.
Yes, and it is hard to understand it because the numbers grow exponentially, and you know, we in our daily lives don't deal with numbers that are being talked about right now, like trillions.
Right.
The differences between a million, billion, and a trillion, for instance, are I should have this tattooed on my wrist or something so that I can remember. I translate it into time in the
Right.
book.
Right.
Remember?
Yes.
And I'm just going to take a guess, but the median income of Americans in 2008 was something like 14 minutes, and when you translated it into time, $1 per second, right?
Mhm.
And by comparison, Bill Gates, who at that time was the richest guy, I think he had 44 billion at that point. He's, like twice that much now. And Jeff Bezos is bigger than that, right? But if you translated his wealth into or his income into 44 billion, it would be, like 3,800 years
Right.
compared to their 14 minutes, right?
Right.
But most people don't think that when they're, looking at those numbers, because million, billion, and trillion, they all kind of sound alike, and that one is bigger than the other, but you don't understand that exponential difference
Mhm.
that number produce, and it's mind-blowing. It's impossible to even really fathom, because none of us have that many beans to count, none of us,
No.
including Mother Earth, so eventually these numbers just become unsustainable, and that's why we have these crashes every so often, dependably, because it just has to work that way. Somebody eventually cannot pay, and then the whole thing comes tumbling down. That's what happened in 2008.
Right. Another thing I found very interesting, because Bernard Lietaer was a neighbor of mine, as I told you,
Yes.
is the fact that if all the interest was paid on all the loans, the whole system would collapse. It just can't work.
Yeah.
There always has to be money owed to keep it going.
Yes.
And
Yes.
money cannot be paid off and the system stay intact. It's very hard for me to get my mind around that idea, but enough people who know a lot have convinced me that that's true. And it's Ellen Brown, Bernard Lietaer have all said the same thing.
Yes. Yes. There's an organization in England, Positive Money, that is, talking about, and the Green Party here in the United States is talking about a different money system that would be created as credit directly into the economy, instead of through treasury bonds and
Right.
from the wealthy people, of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of interesting things on this that I certainly wouldn't have learned had I not had Bernard as a neighbor. When he was writing the book, The Future of Money, which I put in the chat box, he and I used to get together for lunch a few times a week and discuss all the ideas he was and the books he was reading in putting together his ideas about the yin and yang currency. So I got very interested in economics in a way I hadn't been before, but I thought it was fortuitous that he was my neighbor at that point, when I was just trying to figure out what's the connection between peace and economics.
Yeah.
And boy, that opened up a can of worms, but it also opened up a whole world of thinking that I certainly had never been exposed to. And I think you come through a similar background.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And just
Well, I think I told you that I heard Bernard Lietaer talk when he came to Vermont, and talking about how money was created. And I, being a journalist, said, well, that can't be right. He's wrong about that. I'm going to fact check that. And so I did. And lo and behold, he was right.
Yeah.
I believe it, but it's certainly, yeah, one of many revelations. Ellen Brown is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole compound interest, the kind of usury that banks and credit card banks have been able to get by with. I haven't seen any legislation to change this. And are you aware of any?
I haven't been paying close attention to legislation. No, I'm sorry, I don't know. It would be lovely to think about it, though. I am encouraged that for the first time, the House used to be the Banking Committee, but now they have a different name. is headed by a woman and has a number of women on it, a number of progressives on it who are holding Wall Street more accountable. I read about that. Another recommendation I can make is Wall Street on Parade. If you're into wonky stuff, they are hound dogs about the details. And sometimes you just need to read the headlines and it's mind blowing. But
Wall Street on Parade?
yes, yes. Pam and Russ Martin, Martens. Yeah, they're
I
great.
haven't heard of that. Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, one area, and I certainly know Elizabeth Warren has been on top of that whole credit card rates and the usury forms of interest. There was a time when interest didn't exceed, and I don't remember exactly what the number was, but I know credit cards are allowed to charge up to, I think, close to 30% interest.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting thing. They can, interesting about interest is they can charge that much interest, but they only do it to the people who are the poorest.
I know, isn't that, it's like the opposite of what you would think, but it's the same way with mortgages and banks. You know, if you have an enormous down payment, well, you'll get a lower interest rate and you can pay it off in 15 years. But if you can't afford it, yeah,
you get a higher interest rate.
A higher interest rate, yeah.
Which is the opposite of the way the Mondragon Bank works in Spain.
Is that right?
Yes, the less money you have, the lower your interest.
Well, that just seems humane. That just seems
logical.
Like kind of a trusting generosity that develops a community, not a system of exploitation.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to go back to that you mentioned in passing, and I thought it was very important when I read it in the book, I'd forgotten about it, that Jonas Salk did not maintain his patent on the polio vaccine. It was given freely.
Yes, yes.
Given freely, and that generosity of, yeah, it's something that today would be looked upon as stupid.
Yes, exactly.
By economists.
Yes.
And yes, it's the caring economy again.
Right, right. Well, yeah. I'm a type 1 diabetic and I take insulin, which was discovered by two doctors back in the 1920s. And in those days, juvenile diabetes, there was nothing to be done. And so there were these wards of children just going into a coma and dying. And these doctors discovered that you could inject, they isolated insulin and then they injected them and the children, came alive. It was like magic almost. And they also gave their patent away. Now, they gave it away to a university, I believe, and something happened so that now insulin is another one of those cash cows.
Right.
They keep reinventing it, adding a little this or that to upgrade it supposedly, and the prices are through the roof.
Here's another little factoid and kind of related is that when we were in Cuba, because we took a group to Cuba in 2015 and 2016, they have some extraordinary medical research in Cuba that we hear nothing about in our country. And we did find out when we were there that they have invented some type of drugs for diabetics that are not available in the US. So that may be something we can talk about later. But they have invented something that's better than what we have and different than what we have.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is not available here.
So
I can find out more about it through the journalist who we've had on our program, and he will know more about it. So I will check on it. I can't believe nobody's going to ask anything. Are you just stymied?
Oh.
Well, we've lost some people. So, okay, here comes Katie.
Yeah, no, Mike.
Oh, it's Mike. Okay, sorry.
I know. I probably
and then
look different
Katie
today
afterwards. Okay, Mike.
I'm a little disheveled today.
Like you're in a car.
Well, yeah, I stopped and then I'm driving around, and I'll have to really hear the whole thing again. Thanks, Rickey. It was really, it was so very interesting. And for me, I mean, it just also when I think about the whole history of of women's rights. I mean, I don't even know where to start on that and what's happening today. And what you said about 1974, I didn't realize that it took, they start something in 1858 and finally finish it off in 1974. Those two numbers just seem so incredibly insane. And look at Afghanistan today. But anyway, it just, yeah, I mean, it's just really beyond belief. But like you say, slowly, these issues are being overcome over time. But it sure has taken a long time. I mean, we're 2022. So it was great. I don't really have any questions I can think of right now. I just wanted to thank you for that, and I want to listen to it again when Georgia sends the link. But I also thought your name is very interesting, Gard Diamond, Rickey Gard the Diamond. So I thought that's kind of just putting that together somehow. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't help it.
Accent of my life. I mean, Gard is my maiden name, and Diamond is my married name, or my children's name.
Guarding the diamonds. I like that.
Anyway, just sort of advertising background, just funny things come into my mind. But thanks so much again, and
thank you,
it's
Mike.
really very interesting.
And I do think that, it's taken a long time, but I think there is a momentum building. And I think people are aware that, hey, Mother Earth is at risk. And so this kind of thinking, we really have to hurry up and rethink things. Yeah,
Everything.
but I think it's happening. I hope it's happening. It's got to.
So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Indeed. Katie, you wanted to say something?
I want to thank you again also, Rickey, and it's really great to be here. It is a strange time of year, so I'm sorry there aren't more people because usually we are, but it's mid-afternoon on a Friday and everybody's rushing around in in a weird economy. But what's on my mind a lot these days is the amount of powerlessness in the collective culture and in the psyche of many people I speak to and work with as a therapist. And I wonder if you can maybe refer me to any reading on that, and or I am a little bit intimidated by math and the economy because that is not my area of strength. So, but in this, but you're very welcoming though. Thank you. Anyway, I'm concerned about it because when we say we are moving forward, I worry, are we really uniting? Are we, what's your personal experience? I know you're involved with Ms. and other places. Do you feel the coalitions and the cooperation happening between people, or do you experience more divisiveness and competition? And I guess my larger question is anything you can comment on regarding the learned helplessness that I think people are getting overwhelmed with so much to deal with.
Oh, I do agree with you. I see that feeling of overwhelmness. And then with the COVID, also being isolated and afraid, right?
Right.
And so I don't think it's doing anyone's mental health any good. But your question again was, you wanted me to point you.
Any comments? I'm sorry. Okay.
I think I am seeing that kind of division, and it is really discouraging. And one of the things that I'm doing is trying to take a media fast, because I think the media is kind of designed to, no conflict, no story, right? And so so that's where they tend to focus. And I think there are a lot of really hopeful things. One of the things in my column at Ms. is called Women Unscrewing Screwnomics, which I love because, screwing is a sexual metaphor that is, kind of cruel. But as soon as you say, oh, we're unscrewing it, it's all of a sudden it's carpentry, and so I try to focus on solutions, which is why Georgia Kelly has an article about her work at my column at Ms. Magazine. I should put that link in there too.
Yeah.
Oh, that
do.
would be good on monitored. Yeah, that would be fun.
Uh, so I don't know what the solutions are. I try to, send out positive vibes if I can. I try to laugh. I found last night I was feeling really discouraged. Why was that? Oh, I think it was because my husband was at the mailbox and the mailman was there, and we had just seen that dreadful person is still in charge of the post office who slowed down the mail-in ballots.
Oh.
But anyway, the postman said, my husband said, well, are you still having trouble, finding people to work at the post office? And he said, oh yeah, Americans just don't even want to work, and it was just a real downer. And I was just feeling like I think we have to go out someplace where we can just hear other people talking and watch them walk their dogs. So we can go downtown and sit on the bench and just kind of witness other people living their lives. And most of them are not violent or cruel. Even those dreadful people you see on the media, school board meetings going like this, they probably have their kind moments. I try to remember that. But I don't think the media, and Facebook in particular, and the social media is doing us a heck of a lot of good, because what they do is, in the same way that we're trying at an economy of our own to increase the volume of our voices collectively, they're increasing the volume of,
Whatever pays.
head turning at accidents, the dreadful things,
Or makes the money.
yeah, I guess so.
Mhm.
I don't totally understand the phenomenon, but
Sensationalism.
yeah,
Yes.
I don't know if that helps, but I'll think about your question, and if I come across a book that I think would be useful, talking about people's relationship with money. It's a really taboo subject. We
Mhm.
don't
It
talk about
is
it together, and there's a lot of shame connected with
a
it.
lot.
I feel like, oh, we're inadequate in some way, or I mentioned how I felt when I was on welfare. Well, I didn't know then. I didn't know it until years later, that at the time women were making 59 cents on a man's dollar. That was the pay equity. So there was a reason why my bank account wouldn't cooperate. The
Right.
myth that I believed that if I were working full time I could support a family wasn't true for me.
Right.
And so yeah, some of those taboos just need to be looked at more closely. So that's what we're trying to do in an economy of our own, is talk about, for instance, today, the Economic Policy Institute, I just posted this on social media that I said, stay away from it if you can, but I still use it. But the Economic Policy Institute just had a graph that showed the people who are more poorly paid are the people who cannot get sick time, and they're the ones that really are suffering, and they can't take time off to get a vaccine, for instance. So just that, sharing that kind of information, I think, can be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and your
Thank
book
you.
does have some solutions as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I will.
But
check.
I think I want to underline that. Thank you, because that's a good point. The shame and the discomfort. I joke with people that the things we don't want to talk about are sex and money. But I honestly find that money is more uncomfortable to talk about these days than sex, which is not like it was 40 years ago, perhaps. I mean, both were equally difficult then. But now it's it's a big fly in the ointment, and I think that's great focus for some of your work.
Yes. I talk about both. They're definitely interconnected. They really are. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think you're both right on that money is even more a taboo subject for conversation than sex. It
Mm.
certainly has become that. Well, it always has been for women, I think. We just feel inadequate around money a lot unless we're making a lot.
Mm.
And then we'll probably don't want people to know we make a lot because we're not supposed to. I mean, there is a lot going on either end of the spectrum there. And I think getting over the fear of talking about this, the fear of being judged or shamed, is an important part of an economy of our own. Is helping women get past those barriers
Mhm.
of shame and feeling of inadequacy.
There is one other thing I just mentioned briefly, since we're small, if it's okay. I am a writer, and among other things, and I'm really bumping up against this topic in women, in particular of the inner critic, our inner, and I believe it's an extra dose of inner, I call it inner terrorism, because we are in a patriarchy, so we have not only voices in our heads saying we're not enough and we're not adequate or too much or fat or skinny or whatever, but we have a double dose because the men, I think, collude at the patriarchy has helped make that possible. And in your conversations, I encourage somehow this theme of the inner shame and the inner condemnation that we do on ourselves about whether we have too much or not enough money, to be woven into those conversations. The inner tyrant is a serious problem in the psyche.
Mm.
Very
Mhm.
good point.
Mhm.
I mean, I know it's a little digression, but not really.
No, I think that inner terrorism. It's. I mean, because ultimately, when we're talking about the patriarchy, we're talking about the ultimate power play, which is violence.
Right.
And you know, you don't want to do what I say. Well, how about a gun to the head? You know.
Right.
Generally, people don't allow themselves to be exploited or terrorized unless violence is at least threatened, right? I mean, and right now we're all living with this terrible threat of violence.
Right.
Uh,
And I'm just saying that, like, I worked with a client yesterday because I'm a psychotherapist, and she said, well, I'm a people pleaser, so I don't have my voice. And I said, what's the real issue here? The issue was when she says what she needs, she beats herself up.
Mhm.
And
yeah,
so
right.
that's kind of what I mean, talking about money too. It's like, well, what right do I have? What am I adequate in regards to this conversation? That should be named, because I'm even feeling it today. Like, could I really comment on this topic of economics because I haven't read enough on it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because we're talking about real life experience, not just the books we've read. And I
Right. And
think what you're
speaking
bringing
up.
up, Katie, is really important.
Thank you. And the difficulty of speaking up. Thanks for,
Yes.
it's
Right.
nice I got to speak up.
Yes,
Yes,
I'm
you
glad
did.
you did speak up. Glad you're here. So I'm going to end the recording shortly, but Rickey, is there anything you want to say at the end of our session today before I stop the recording?
Just what a pleasure it is to talk with you about this subject. And I think if we can engage with one another and take that risk that you're talking about, being brave enough to just venture with a question or a sympathetic fellow kindredship, then we're not so alone. And I think this is a good step toward doing that. So thank you for inviting me and engaging.
Well, thank you so much, Rickey. This has been really a rich experience, and I love listening to you and hearing your story and what you've learned. It's very, very inspiring to all of us. So I know more people will hear the recording and see it, and I'm very happy about that too.